All right, let's dive right in, shall we? You know, I love bringing you these deep dives, especially when it's about stuff you're really into. And today, it's all about cybersecurity and privacy. And let me tell you, I've got a whole stack of articles here about Apple and iCloud security. And, well, some of these developments are pretty surprising, to say the least, especially if you're in the UK, like yourself.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah, it's juicy stuff. So end-to-end encryption, we've all heard of it, right? It's supposed to be like the gold standard for keeping your data safe and sound. But now we're seeing headlines about Apple, maybe weakening that protection specifically for their UK customers. And get this, some folks are even saying they caved to like government pressure and stuff. But luckily, we've got our expert here ready to break it all down, cut through the tech jargon and tell us what it all really means for you and me.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so let's jump right into the thick of it. The Register, they dropped this like bombshell of an article, right? Headline screams, Apple ends iCloud advanced data protection for UK customers. So what's the deal here? Why is everyone freaking out about this?
Yeah. The register is definitely onto something big here. Basically, what they're talking about is Apple turning off this really important feature, advanced data protection. They call it ADP. And they're doing this only for iCloud users in the UK. Now, what made ADP so special was it was their strongest encryption option, like the kind where even Apple couldn't see your data.
Wait, hold up. Not even Apple could sneak a peek. Like, that's what made ADP the big deal.
You got it. It's like having this super secure safe for all your digital stuff, only you have the key, nobody else, not even the company that made the safe.
Right.
It was a massive win for privacy, especially with all the data breaches and cyber attacks happening these days, right?
Makes sense. Okay, but now they're taking away that extra protection for UK users. What's Apple saying about all this? I mean, did they even give a reason?
Well, in the article, Apple's saying they're gravely disappointed that UK customers won't have the same level of security anymore. And they're adamant that they haven't built a back door or anything like that, to give the government special access.
Gravely disappointed, huh? That's some pretty strong language. It's not like they're just brushing this off as a minor tweak, are they? So what's the real worry here? What's everyone so concerned about?
Right. It's a big deal. So here's the thing. By disabling ADP, what they're doing is they're giving UK law enforcement the ability to potentially access a whole lot of your personal stuff that's stored on iCloud. We're talking backups, photos, notes, even your voice memos. Before, with ADP, even if they had a warrant, they couldn't get to any of that.
So even if Apple's saying, hey, there's no back door, the end result is kind of the same, isn't it? Like UK authorities can still get in.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's causing all this controversy. Is like, even if Apple isn't directly handing over keys, disabling their strongest encryption is basically achieving the same thing.
Man, that's got to be worrying for folks in the UK, especially with all the news about data breaches and cyber threats these days. Like, what's the real impact of all this? What kind of risks are we actually talking about?
Okay, so let's say, worst case scenario, your iCloud gets hacked, right? Without ADP, whoever's behind that hack, they could potentially grab all sorts of sensitive information, like your photos, private messages, maybe even financial details from your iCloud backups.
Oh, okay, so this isn't just theoretical, is it? The register actually lists the specific stuff that's now vulnerable, right?
Yeah, they do. They specifically call out iCloud backups, storage, photos, notes, reminders, Safari bookmarks, even stuff like Siri shortcuts, wallet passes, voice memos. Oh, and free-form digital whiteboard files. It's quite the list. Really shows you how big this security change actually is.
Wow, so yeah, there's some real sensitive information at stake here. I bet this is making a lot of people rethink what they keep on iCloud.
Yeah, definitely makes you think twice. But okay, before we, jump to conclusions, let's try to see things from the other side for a minute. Why is the UK government so insistent on having this access to encrypted data? What's their argument here?
Well, their main point is that sure, encryption is great for privacy and all, but it can also be a bit of a double-edged sword, right? They're saying that it makes it way harder for law enforcement to do their jobs, investigate serious crimes, stuff like terrorism, child exploitation. Basically, they're saying it helps the bad guys hide.
Yeah, I can see that side of it too, especially when it comes to protecting, vulnerable people. But then couldn't this access be misused too? What's stopping them from, I don't know, snooping on everyday folks or using this power for, like, shady stuff? That's exactly what privacy advocates are worried about. They're saying that weakening encryption, it makes everyone more vulnerable, not just to cyber attacks, but also to, like, government overreach. It could have a chilling effect on free speech, And they're making the point that once this kind of access exists, it's really hard to control or limit.
So it's not just about trusting the government we have now. It's about, like, setting a precedent that could backfire later on. Man, this whole thing really shows you the tension between security and privacy, doesn't it? Two things that are super important, but they seem to be, like, constantly clashing.
Yeah, totally. It's this delicate balancing act, and both sides have legitimate concerns. The tricky part is figuring out solutions that actually address real security threats
Mhm.
without sacrificing individual privacy and freedom.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, the article mentioned something called the Investigatory Powers Bill. What's that all about, and how does it tie into all of this?
Ah, yeah, the Investigatory Powers Bill. Some folks call it the Snoopers Charter, not so fondly. It's basically a UK law that gives law enforcement and intelligence agencies more power to, well, surveil people. It's been pretty controversial, with privacy advocates saying it gives the government way too much access to our personal data.
I see. So is this whole thing with Apple like a direct result of this law then?
It's hard to say for sure. Apple hasn't come right out and said that the Investigatory Powers Bill is the only reason for getting rid of ADP in the UK, but it's definitely a big piece of the puzzle. That law has been criticized a lot for being too broad, you know,
Hmm.
and for its potential for abuse. So, yeah, Apple probably face a lot of pressure to play by their rules.
Right. So even if Apple might have preferred to keep ADP, they kind of have to follow the law, don't they?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
That's the reality for any tech company operating in different countries. They have to deal with all sorts of regulations, and sometimes that means facing pressure from governments to, like, compromise on security features in the name of national security or law enforcement, even if they don't really want to.
It's like this digital tug of war, and user privacy is stuck in the middle. So let's say you're in the UK and you're like really worried about all of this. What can you do? Are there ways to get that strong privacy protection back?
Definitely. One thing you could do is, be more careful about what you actually store in iCloud. If you've got really sensitive stuff, maybe keep it local on your device or use a separate, more secure storage service.
So being mindful about what goes in the cloud is more important than ever, right? Are there other alternatives out there that are like built with privacy in mind?
Oh yeah, for sure. There are a bunch of cloud storage providers that offer end-to-end encryption, even in places with laws like the UK's Investigatory Powers Bill. Services like Proton Drive, Tresorit, Sync.com, these are all designed to keep your data private, even from the companies themselves.
Okay, good to know there are still options for folks who really value their privacy. But let's be real, most people stick with iCloud because it's just so easy to use, you know? It
Yeah,
works seamlessly with all their Apple devices.
that's true. And for a lot of users, that extra security of ADP, maybe they didn't even realize they had in the first place. But situations like this, they really highlight how important data privacy is, right? It makes you stop and think, is the convenience really worth the risk?
Yeah, exactly. It's like anything else, being informed is key. We got to understand the trade-offs and make conscious choices about how we handle our data. But hey, even if you decide to stick with iCloud, there are still things you can do to stay safe.
Absolutely. For one, make sure you've got two-factor authentication turned on for your Apple ID. That adds another layer of security. It means someone trying to get into your account needs more than just your password. It's a lot harder to hack.
Good tip. And that's good advice for any online account, really. What else should people keep in mind?
Be careful about those phishing emails or messages, the ones that try to trick you into giving away your Apple ID and password. Remember, Apple would never ask for that info through email or text. And keep your devices updated too. Those security updates are important.
All good practical advice. So even though this whole Apple and iCloud thing in the UK is, a bit concerning, there are still things we can do to protect ourselves and keep our data private.
For sure. It's about being proactive,
Yeah.
taking control of our own digital security. We can't just rely on tech companies or governments to do it for us. You got to be informed and make smart choices about how we handle our own stuff.
This has been a real eye-opener for sure. I think our listeners getting a good grasp of just how big this issue really is. And it's not just about Apple or iCloud, is it? It's about these bigger trends that are shaping the future of privacy and security and this, increasingly digital world we live in.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around. Sometimes it feels like, I don't know, technology is changing so fast that we can barely keep up with, like, what it all means for us.
Yeah.
But I think this deep dive, it's given our listener a good place to start, at least. I think so, too. It's
Yeah.
easy to get lost in the weeds, with all the technical stuff about encryption and backdoors and whatnot. But I think the important thing is to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture. Like, what does this whole situation tell us about I don't know, the balance of power between governments, tech companies, and regular people in this digital age.
Right, right. We've been focusing on Apple and the UK, but this isn't just a one-off thing, is it? It seems like governments everywhere are trying to get more access to encrypted data.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is a global trend for sure. Lots of countries are struggling with this same dilemma.
Yeah.
How to balance national security with individual privacy rights in a world that's becoming more digital every day. It's a tough one.
And it's not just about, stopping terrorism or serious crime either. There's always the risk that this kind of access could be used for, like, less noble purposes, silencing critics, targeting political opponents, that sort of thing.
Definitely a valid concern. I
Yep.
mean, we've already seen cases where governments have used surveillance tech in ways that a lot of people considered, pretty intrusive, even abusive. That's why it's so important to have strong laws and oversight in place to make sure these powers aren't misused, right?
So it's not just about trusting the government we have now, it's about making sure there are safeguards to protect our privacy no matter who's in charge.
100%. We need to be thinking long term, you know, what kind of world do we want to live in? One where every move we make is tracked and monitored, or one where we prioritize individual privacy and freedom?
It's almost like these aren't just tech questions, they're like big philosophical questions about what kind of society we want to build.
Exactly. And these are conversations we need to have together as a society. We can't just leave it up to the tech companies or the governments to figure it all out. We need to be involved, shaping the digital future we want.
This whole thing has really shown how important it is to be informed, to be an active participant in all of this. We can't just ignore it and hope for the best. We need to understand what's at stake and make our voices heard.
I couldn't agree more. And, knowledge is power. The more we know about these technologies and the rules that govern them, the better choices we can make about our own digital lives.
Well, I think we've given our listener a pretty good foundation here, at least a starting point for understanding this complex issue.
I hope so. And I definitely encourage your listener to keep digging into this. There are tons of great resources out there online, in libraries, and this is an ongoing conversation, so stay curious, stay engaged.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the nitty-gritty details of Apple's decision to the bigger questions about privacy and security in our digital world. If you had to sum it up, what would you say is the most important thing for our listener to take away from all of this?
The most important thing, I think, is that we all have a role to play in this digital revolution, you know? Our choices matter. Our voices matter. We need to be aware of the trade-offs and make informed decisions about how we manage our data, how we interact with all this technology.
I like that. We're not just passive bystanders. We have the power to shape the digital world we want to see.
That's right. It starts with being informed, being engaged, and, asking those tough questions.
Well said. On that note, I want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It's been an awesome conversation, and I hope it's given you, our listener, a better understanding of this whole iCloud security situation, the privacy implications, and the choices you have as a user. And hey, remember, this deep dive was made just for you, based on your interests. We're always trying to bring you the most relevant and insightful information we can find. If you're interested in learning more, I definitely encourage you to do some more research. Check out the UK's Investigatory Powers Bill. Maybe look into some of those alternative cloud storage options we talked about. There's a ton of information out there. The more you know, the better you'll be able to navigate this crazy digital world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and thanks for listening.